I have played Dokkan Battle for over 10 years, and for 10 years, I never knew what the Dokkan mode actually did. And that got me thinking about how most people probably feel the same way. So in this video, for the sake of curiosity and science, I decided to break down every aspect of the Dokkan mode in Dokkan. Subscribe and like the video if you end up learning something new. Now let's get straight into the basics. Within the actual game, Dokkan tells us 6 things about the Dokkan mode. First of all, we've got the character's attack will attack all enemies. Number 2, the damage dealt will increase according to the number of buttons you tapped on. Number 3, the enemy's guard will not be activated. And number 4, the enemy's defense will become 0. Number 5 is HP will be recovered at the start of the next turn according to the damage dealt to the enemy. And obviously, number 6 is to tap on the numbers when the circle passes over them. Now, the most obvious one is number 1 because it even says right on the screen that it attacks all enemies as you're doing the attack. So I'm sure most of you know that. But before I get deeper into detail, how do you actually get a Dokkan mode? In every battle, you start with 10 charges towards the actual Dokkan mode. You need 50 total charges to launch the actual Dokkan attack. If you start with 10 at the beginning of a mission, that means you only need 40 charges to actually get to the Dokkan mode. Also, once a Dokkan mode is actually used, then you need 50 charges from 0. So it resets. You don't get the 10 starting again. Otherwise, it would just be 40. Anyways, every time you collect orbs, that's 1 charge. And every time you collect the same type orbs, that's 2 charges. So say you have 3 physical type characters in one turn. If all 3 choose physical orbs, then you'll get 6 charges, right? 2 charges for each character. If all 3 chose different type orbs, then they would be getting only 1 charge each, resulting in 3 charges. In a turn, you can get from 3 to 6 charges, 6 being the most, obviously. And by that logic, that means by turn 7, you can have a Dokkan mode if you collect all the right orbs. 7 turns to get to your first Dokkan mode is not too bad, considering you will probably reach 7 turns in most fights. And it is a pretty useful attack. It does help you out a ton. Lots of value within the Dokkan mode that people, quite often sleep on. Now, let's talk about what the nodes actually do. Everyone seems to think that the speed for the nodes is random, and most people, will say, yes, it is. My theory is that the speed of the nodes, how the thing swipes over the Z or whatever, Z, whatever you want to say, I think it is depending on how difficult the fight is. So I think if you're fighting a really hard boss, it goes a lot faster. And if you're fighting, like a Dokkan event, it'll go a lot slower. That's just my theory. That's a game theory, you could say. But there's no proof or evidence to prove that. I'm sure some of you have some evidence to disprove that. Let me know in the comments. Anyways, now for the amount of nodes you click, there's obviously different buffs and what's going on. So the minimum is 2 nodes, and that gives you a 1.3x attack multiplier. So each extra node is either an additional 0.2x buff or just a 0.1x buff to attack. The order doesn't matter, just the number of nodes. So 3 nodes is 1.5x, 4 nodes is 1.7x, 5 nodes is 1.8x, 6 nodes is 2 times, and 7 is 2.1. Obviously a 2.1 multiplier is no joke, so that does actually make quite a big difference in something like festival battles when you're taking on a boss that has 1 billion health. It will add up, especially if you have an attack stat of 70 million at that point. Something secret that you may not know about and isn't really mentioned, besides obviously the fact that defense is reduced to 0 of the enemy and that it breaks guard or whatever. Well, they don't really mention this, but did you know that the Dokkan mode actually does far more than just multiply damage and attack all enemies? I didn't know this, but the Dokkan mode actually also makes your attack a guaranteed crit. So it may not show the golden text, but it will be a crit no matter what. So even if the text isn't golden and your character has 0 crit, the attack will still be a crit. So no matter what, Dokkan mode is a crit. Now, a crit deals 1.9 times damage, right? That doesn't stack with type effectiveness, which deals 1.5 times damage. But the thing about Gogeta units is most of them have effectiveness to all types, so they have just a base 1.5 times damage basically, no matter what type they're facing, and it jumps up to a 1.9 if it's a crit. So basically just doing a crit is worth 0.4 times more damage. I know I'm just throwing a lot of numbers at you right now, but that's what I'm talking about. So type effectiveness is a 1.5 times damage multiplier, crit is 1.9 times more damage. just in total, no matter what type you're facing, because the crit just ignores everything. So basically, this is the attack buff stack of what's going on with the Dokkan mode, right? You've got 1.9 times 2.1, which comes out to a total of 3.99 while ignoring defense. If you want an example, let's just say a unit has a 1 million damage stat normally, and they use your Dokkan mode, then they get that 3.99 multiplier. The damage they deal will be 3,990,000. Okay, now let's just say the boss has 70% damage reduction. Then you just multiply the number by 0.3, because obviously 100 minus 70 is 30. You turn 30% into a decimal, that's 0.3. Obviously, you'd have to use your calc, which is short for calculator in most scenarios. But let's just say we throw that in the calculator. We multiplied the number 3,990,000 by 0.3, and it comes out to 1,197,000 damage. That is the actual damage you deal with the Dokkan mode. I just threw in that extra damage reduction thing just to show you guys how that works. But regardless, that's just part of the fun. Now, let's just say that sure is a lot of math for a game about fighting and bubble popping. But anyways, that's about it for what I wanted to talk about with the Dokkan mode. That's everything you should know, everything you need to know, and some things that you probably didn't know about the Dokkan mode. Leave a like and subscribe if you learned something new. And thank you all so much for watching, guys. Bye.